Hi everyone, my name is Arvind Jagayat, and I'm the lead of the Mock Social Media Website project, which has produced the Mock Social Media Website tool. This video is intended to guide you on how to set up the Mock Social Media Website tool online. That is, collect participants remotely by sending them to this website, which will collect their data, and you can then download their participant data from that website as well. This video is intended to cover that process from top to bottom. That is, getting the code, modifying the code, getting a domain name, and working with AWS and various other pieces of software essential to getting the tool, specifying it for your specific setup, getting it online, and being able to then interact with it. Throughout this video, I'll try my best to show you as much as I can on my computer screen so that you can replicate it exactly when you try to go through it. But there will be some things that I have to blur or redact because they have sensitive security information that might compromise my own deployment of the Mock Social Media Website tool online. So I hope you understand, but I'll try to make sure that I verbally and in the written documentation explain everything out in very specific detail for what you need to do so there's no ambiguity. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll go through the software that you need to have installed and the services you need to be signed up for or have purchased for you to be able to deploy the tool online. Now, despite us deploying the tool online, we will need to make some changes locally because it just makes things so much easier. The first of these is Visual Studio Code. Now, Visual Studio Code is a code editor. It essentially makes the process of modifying code very easy and has many different extensions and can interface with all different kinds of software and command line languages, which is what we'll need throughout this process. It's highly versatile, highly accessible, and despite not being the only code editor you can use because its function is essentially generic, it is highly recommended, and I'll be going through the remainder of this tutorial using Visual Studio Code. The next software that you'll need to have installed is Git. Git is distributed version control software, and that's a fancy way of saying that it can easily send and receive files while keeping track of different changes that are made so you don't end up overwriting things you don't want to overwrite or duplicating things that you already have. And when you install Git, especially if you're on Windows, you will also have access to a bash terminal, which is a way of interfacing with Linux command line language, which is already built in if you're using Linux or Mac. Two other things you will need. The first is a GitHub account. So GitHub is a website that allows you to store code in areas that are called repositories. And each repository contains code for a given project. And these repositories, through the use of Git, which you just installed, can be accessed by multiple people, updated by multiple people, branched into different other repositories. It's essentially just where developers put their code, allow other people to access their code, and modify their code if need be. And the last thing that you'll need is a domain name. So to have your site up and running somewhere online, you're going to need a URL for people to go to. And there are many different ways that you can go about this. Say you already own a domain, say for your personal website or a lab website, you can create a subdomain of that, which I won't cover in this tutorial because I kind of want to keep it focused, and this is likely going to be a little long of a tutorial. Or you can buy a domain name that's specific to collecting data using the tool, which is what this tutorial will focus on. But in case you already have an existing domain or you have an IT department that might be able to allow you to set up the Mock Social Media Website tool on a subdomain of, say, a university or whatever institution you belong to website, you can either contact your IT department or you can quickly Google around and find resources on how you might be able to set up the tool on a subdomain of a domain that already exists. There are many different places that you can buy a domain. I personally use Namecheap. I found it fairly easy to use and it's worked well for me. This is not an endorsement of Namecheap, but you can go to a number of different places. There's Google Domains, there's HostGator, there's so many different services that will try to sell you a domain. And for the most part, the prices don't vary that much between them. But overall, you would go to a website like Namecheap and register your domain name with them. It shouldn't cost you more than like $20 unless you got some really, really specific or high in demand domain name. A couple things are worth considering when choosing a domain name and purchasing it from a domain registrar. The first is that you don't want your domain name to be too out there or look sketchy. So if you're buying a domain name that's just like a random assortment of characters and numbers, .com, participants might think that that's looking a little fishy, a little suspicious, and think that they went to the wrong place. So you want to stick to something that has some semantic meaning, and participants, when they arrive there, they're like, okay, this is the place I should go. For us, we bought studysocial.media because we tried a whole bunch of things and that seemed to get the point across. You can think of a domain name as a sort of address to something online. It's not what is stored online, it's how people are able to access it. What's the address that they type in? So this is not actually where the contents of the mock social media website tool or the data will be hosted. It's just how people will access it. It's important to get two things when you purchase your domain name. And the first of that is who is privacy protection. So one reason I like Namecheap is that bundled in is free who is protection. And what this does is it protects you as the person who has bought the domain name so that your address is not out there, because you do have to provide them with an address. Your personal information, your phone number, etc. is not in there, just in case you do get some blowback. This is just a very common sense online security measure for you to take. I highly, highly, highly recommend that you get this. It's not necessary for you to get it to put the tool online, but I implore you to get it. The other thing that you'll need to get, and is not always bundled in, is an SSL certificate. An SSL certificate is essentially a way of proving to the web browser, as well as whoever's browsing a website, that your website is safe, secure, and whatever information that goes from the person visiting the website to its destination is encrypted and cannot be accessed by someone else on the network. Now, this doesn't mean that it will stop them from putting in their social insurance or social security number, but it does mean that whatever data that they put in cannot be immediately seen by anyone else on that network. This is essential because as we're slowly moving from HTTP websites to HTTPS websites, to get that S, you need an SSL certificate, essentially. And it's increasingly something that is being required by browsers, and some will even stop you from visiting HTTP versions of the websites, or they'll demand an HTTPS version of the website when someone arrives there. So this is a must. When buying domain names, you'll have the option to buy for multiple years at one time, likely at a bigger discount. So if you anticipate that you'll be using this tool for multiple years, it is wise to perhaps get a couple years worth of both your domain name as well as your SSL certificate. However, websites vary in how many years you can buy ahead at once. There are always deals going on, so it's worthwhile to shop around and find the website that gives you an SSL certificate, who is protection, and the domain name at the cheapest price, and prospectively in case you renew. And this largely depends on the domain name that you would like to buy, so I can only guide you so much on this. There's also this website, which is tldlist.com, which allows you to compare prices from different domain registrars. So remember, the registrar is the person who sells you the domain name. And they all kind of work from the same pool of domain names that are available, but they'll sell you to them for different prices based on their pricing models. It's a little complicated, but if you get a domain name from one registrar, it's not like another registrar can sell that name. It's yours now, you own it. So shop around, see what works best for you, your lab, your team, and once you have your domain name, you're ready to proceed to the next step. All right, let's get started with the meat of it all. To deploy this website online, we will be making use of Amazon Web Services. There's no real particular reason that you have to go with Amazon Web Services, as the services they will provide are generic and you can find them from competing services such as Google Cloud or Microsoft's Azure. However, for the purposes of this tutorial, we will be using Amazon Web Services, as from what I understand, a lot of people interested in using the tool have no experience with this kind of stuff, and neither did I a very short time ago. So why are we using Amazon Web Services, and what do I need to commit to? What we'll be making use of specifically is Amazon's free tier of services. And the good thing about the free tier is that there is no upfront cost for any of this. It's free for 12 months, and the services that we will use provide us with just enough to run the mock social media website tool without needing to upgrade to a higher tier service or pay per usage, which is what happens after the 12 months expire for the free tier. The two services that we'll be making use of are actually right here: Amazon EC2 and Amazon RDS. Amazon EC2 is essentially storage. This is where the mock social media website will be stored. So people will access it via the domain name, but what they see when they go to that domain name, go to that URL, will be hosted on Amazon EC2. The other thing that we will be using is Amazon RDS, and RDS is essentially database software. So even though EC2 stores things as well, it's primarily storing like the code and what kind of pictures and graphics and stuff compose the website, whereas RDS is specialized database software that will hold the data that is collected by the Mock Social Media website tool. And the data that I'm talking about is not just participants' data, it's the actual conditions that are built using the Mock Social Media website tool by researchers, which then the participants are sent to interact with. So RDS will store both the studies and the participants' data when they interact with the studies, whereas EC2 is primarily just hosting the core files of the tool. In the associated written documentation, I'll be constantly linking to tutorials made by Amazon on how to use these things, how to create an account, how to troubleshoot if you're having issues, all of that kind of stuff. But I'm going to go through it with you guys from top to bottom because this is actually my first time doing it. And so if I can do it, I think you can do it. Previously, we had a web developer that handled all this stuff, but I think before I entrust anyone else to take the tool and try to deploy it themselves online, I should be able to do it. So here we go. So once you have an account, you can go to the AWS Management Console and sign in. When you go to sign in, you'll be signing in as a root user. When you sign in, it'll look something like this. This is your management console, and this kind of gives you an overview of the kind of services that you have recently used and other kind of things that don't really matter to this tutorial. Now, the first thing that you'll need to do is to make sure that when you are signed into AWS, you are in the region that you are in. What do I mean by this? At the top right here, there's a little drop down, which gives you a whole bunch of different server regions that you can choose from. For me, I'm located in Canada, so I have set mine to Canada Central. The location of your server primarily matters for optimizing the speed at which it takes to connect to the Mock Social Media website for both the participants and the researchers. It's not like if I chose the Canadian server, no one outside of Canada would be able to access the website. It's not like that. It just means that when they go to access the website, they'll be pinging off a server in Canada as opposed to, I don't know, Bahrain. It is ideal that you choose a server location that is close to you and where you will be sampling from. In my case, this is Canada. This doesn't make the biggest difference in the world, but wherever you can optimize the speed at which participants access the website, the better, because people are generally really demanding of how fast their websites load, and Google has all these statistics about, people wait more than 2 seconds and they just leave a website because they don't think it's working. People have high expectations of websites loading fast, and so pick the location that's best for you. Once you have chosen your location, this is where all your other services, namely RDS, the database, and EC2, which is the storage, will be housed. So you'll need to constantly make sure that when you're creating an RDS database or you're creating an EC2 instance, that you are still in the same server. Otherwise, you may encounter issues. However, I'm pretty sure that if you just set it now at the very start, it will stay like this no matter what you try to build. So I have mine selected at Canada. It will just refresh because that's already in Canada. Okay, the first thing that we'll do is we'll set up the database that our data will be sent to. And for this, again, we will be using Amazon RDS. You can see it shows up here in our recently visited services, but if you go up here to services, you can see a huge list of all the different services that Amazon offers. If you need to switch between RDS and EC2, remember that this is always up here in the corner and it can help you get between them quickly because sometimes you will need to do that. So here we'll go to services, and under database, we'll go to RDS. So whenever you enter any Amazon service on AWS, this left-hand menu will help you navigate around the different things that you'll need to go between. When creating the database, we won't be doing much of that, but we'll start by creating a database. And right now you can actually see I already have a database set up. Right here under DB instances, DB standing for database, I already have 1 out of the 40 that I'm allowed to have set up already. And this is what's running the Mock Social Media website tool on studysocial.media, which is what we run studies out of in our lab, as well as where I have the demonstration study in case you have interacted with that. We're going to create a new database. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit this button here under the Create Database panel to create our database. And we're going to go through a series of steps here. So you're going to choose Standard Create up here. For engine options, we're going to go with MySQL, and MySQL is a common database software. And for the version, we're going to go with version 8.0.20. And for templates, we're going to use the free tier, which will already cut down the amount of things that we have to specify. And now we have to actually enter some things that we'll need to remember. So we'll need a DB instance identifier. So this is just a name for the DB instance. You can call this whatever you want, but for the purposes of our tutorial and what is going to be in the written documentation that accompanies it, I'm going to use mock_social_db. And then you're going to need to enter some credentials, which you need to remember because you will need them later. So I would write them down somewhere. The mock_social_db, the DB instance identifier, will be accessible to you later. You can always go check that. But the username and the password that you'll be using, you need to know that later for when you connect the database to the mock social media website tool. So I've just kept admin as the username, and I've entered a secure password that I created using a password generator. You can find many of those online. For the next part, burstable classes, dbt2 micro is what you need to go with, and it's kind of the only option really. For storage, you'll choose general purpose SSD. Again, many of these are defaults. Allocated storage, 20 gigabytes. These might not necessarily be a default for you, so just double check instead of clicking forward because I've already set up one of these before. And you want to disable storage autoscaling. What storage autoscaling does is that it will scale the amount of storage on Amazon servers that's allocated to the database based upon the number of responses you get. Now, 20 gigabytes, what we've allocated thus far, is quite enough already, given the kind of data that you will be collecting. If you keep enable storage autoscaling on, you run the risk of being hit with distributed denial of service attacks, which is when someone programs a whole bunch of bots to go constantly access your website and input junk data, which could extraordinarily increase the amount of storage that you use, and you will get charged for that because it will exceed what is allocated to you by Amazon's free tier of services. So you want to disable this unless you really think that you're going to be collecting a massive amount of data. The next thing that you will be doing is that you will be setting up a VPC, a virtual private cloud, as well as a VPC security group. So you can think of the VPC private cloud and the security group as additional checks on what storage and what databases are allowed to talk to each other and who's allowed to talk to them from the internet, as in people visiting the website. And this is just like an extra layer of security to make sure that no one is illicitly trying to inject things into your database, or no one is trying to store things onto your database that you have not authorized. So in many cases, if you have not used AWS before, you can stick to your defaults. So you can stick to the default VPC that's offered to you and the default security group that is offered to you. For the purposes of this, I already have one set up, so I'll be creating a new one just for this tutorial. So here, I'll go to create new VPC. I will create a new subnet group. And for public access, we want to stick to no because we want no one from the public accessing our database. And I will create a new VPC security group. So a new VPC will be created here and a new security group created here. And I will just call this security tutorial. Excuse me, I'm typing on an angle here. And for availability zone, you'll just leave it as no preference. So you can give the VPC security group a preference of one server over another, but it's kind of beyond the scope of what we're doing here. So I'll just leave it at that. For database authentication, you want to keep it as password authentication, and you won't need to do any additional configuration here. And here's a little reminder of what is offered to you in the free tier here, just before you proceed. So Amazon gives you 750 hours of Amazon RDS, which is the one that we're making, in a single dbt2 micro instance, which is what we're just creating now. 750 hours is essentially just over the amount of hours in a month. So this is monthly. Each month you will have essentially the ability to run this instance for the entirety of the month for 12 months. That's all it means. And 20 gigabytes of storage, which is the amount that we input in. Again, if we put in more, we would be charged more. So as it stands, when you set up your AWS account, you have to put in a credit card, but it doesn't mean you're going to get charged, especially if you choose the free tier. But if you go over the limits, then you run the risk of being charged. Okay, and then we're just going to click create database. It takes some time. And right now it says that, okay, it's still creating the database over here. As you can see, I have an existing one that I already set up, but this one is still being created. And we have found ourselves on the databases menu within the Amazon RDS service. So this might take a few minutes to actually get up and running because it's spinning up a server somewhere right now with that database. Okay, no more than 5 to 10 minutes later, the database has been successfully created And here you see it, the status is available on our newly created database. So here you see it, Mock Social DB is a MySQL type database. It's located in one of the Canadian servers, so Canada Central. What we'll need to do next is set up a parameter group to increase the maximum packet size. So by default, the database will not accept pieces of information going in and out of the database larger than 4 megabytes. However, because the Mock Social Media website tool allows people to attach pictures and videos to their posts, we will need that maximum packet size of 4 megabytes to be increased to something more like 20 megabytes. So the way that we'll do that is we'll navigate to parameter groups here on the left. And here I have some existing parameter groups, but as you probably won't have any currently, we're going to create a new one. We'll click create parameter group in the upper right. It will take some time to load, and also you will get this kind of green notification too when the database has been successfully created. So I'm just going to go close that for now. And then we're going to choose parameter group family, which is going to be MySQL 8.0. We're going to create a name for the parameter group, which I'm just going to call parameter tutorial for our purposes. And I just realized that you have to give the parameter group a description. So I'm just going to say, this is the parameter group for the deploying online tutorial. I hope you're happy, Amazon. Click create. Okay, it's creating. It is created. So now you need to click on the parameter group that you just created. And here you have a whole bunch of parameters that you can change. So these are different aspects of the database that you can modify and change their settings to a different value or a true to a false that will customize the database for your purposes. For our purposes, for the Mock Social Media website tool, we only really care about max allowed packet. So we'll go max allowed packet, and you will see here that it starts to automatically filter, and here's the one we want to change. Not this one, which also says max allowed packet, but it's something else. We will click this one, edit parameters, and now this value area changes. Here's like the acceptable ranges of values that we can put in. And what we'll want to put in here is 2 with 7 zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And this is the equivalent of 20 megabytes in bytes. And we'll click on the orange save changes. It has saved, I believe. So if we go back to parameter groups, we go to parameter tutorial again, we will now see that it has updated. What we're going to do next is assign this parameter group to our database. So right now we can have our databases and our parameter groups, and one database can be assigned to one parameter group, 2 databases can be assigned to the same parameter group, and this sort of modular system allows for more flexibility. But for us, we just want our one database to be associated with the parameter group that we just created. So we're going to go back to databases up here. We're going to click the name of our database, which in this case is Mock Social DB. As you see, this area was a little empty before, the CPU and the current activity, but now it's like really up and running. So we'll go to Mock Social DB. Now, I'm not sure how much of this I'll blur out in editing, but here is the main page for your database. And you see the names at the top, there's summary, it's a whole bunch of tabs here. But what we're going to do right now is in the upper right-hand corner, click this modify button. And it took some time to load, but here we basically are at a similar screen to when we set up the instance. But now that we have a parameter group that we've created, we're going to go down to the additional configuration, which we previously did nothing in, and we're going to assign the new parameter group that we just made, which I called parameter tutorial, to this database. And while we're here, we can just check the backup retention period. So this is how long that Amazon Web Services will keep automated backups of the database. So this will keep one for each of the last 7 days. This can be excessive and potentially hog the amount of resources that the database is taking. So setting this to 1 day is not bad. This means that if your database goes offline, it will at least have a backup from the day before, which is pretty much all you need, the most recent one. That's really the only thing that we need to do here. So we can just go to continue at the bottom. And now it just gives you a summary of the changes that you made. So yeah, we changed the parameter group to the one we created and the retention period from 7 days to 1 day. And for our purposes, I'm just going to apply this immediately as opposed to the next maintenance window, which could be a little further out. So I'll go modify database instance. Once we've successfully modified the instance, you'll see we're back at the main databases screen and says successfully modified instance mock social DB. And we're done setting up the database for the mock social media website tool for now. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up our online storage. So where the files for the mock social media website tool will be hosted and then accessed. We will do that using Amazon EC2 or Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud. So to navigate there, we can just use this services bar, which is always here, by the way, in case you need to switch between RDS and EC2. I'm going to go to EC2. Okay, so when you open up EC2 for the first time, you'll be at this page, which is the EC2 dashboard. Again, here you can get an overview of everything that's going on, but most of this stuff is not pertinent to us. So what we want to do is create a new EC2 instance. Instance is basically just a way of referring to a mini server that they give you access to from a larger server. So Amazon operates this huge, massive server farms, and instead of you physically getting a machine that's in their server rack, the machines kind of work together to give you different slices of their power, and those slices are the instances, and that's what you will make use of. So we want to immediately go to launch instance here, and then launch instance again. And so here we'll be going through multiple different steps to configure our instance to our needs, and I'll guide you through every step of the way. What you'll need to choose for your Amazon machine image is this one, Amazon Linux 2 AMI, specifically the 64-bit x86 version. We'll click select, and that'll move us on to the next step. We will want to select the T2 Micro. That's the only one that's available to you in the free tier. I actually think there's potentially some others as a free trial available, but it'll be pretty clearly highlighted here as the free tier eligible, and there's only one T2 Micro type. So you will select that, go to next, configure instance details. Don't accidentally press this button here because we still need to do some other things. So next, configure instance details. Okay, so on the configure instance details page, you'll need to select the VPC that was just created or just the default one if you are using Amazon Web Services for the first time. For me, I created a new one, so that's this one over here. So I will select that. It's important that you note the VPC that you have selected here, as everything on Amazon will need to be talking through the same VPC for them to be able to access one another's data. That is the mock social media website to send and receive data from the database. So this is the only thing that you'll need to do here. You will go to add storage next. Here, you will use the defaults, but you can change the size of this to 30. Because, as it says down here, free tier eligible customers can get up to 30 gigabytes of EBS general purpose storage. That's the SSD. So why not max it out for now? Because you're not really going to be using this EC2 instance for anything else. The volume type can stay as is, and you will not need to do anything else over here besides change the encryption from non-encrypted to the AWS encryption. And I'll make sure that anything that goes through here is encrypted. We will go next to add tags. We don't need to add tags, so tags can help us organize and sort between different instances if we are running like a lot of instances, but that is not the case here. So we'll just go to the next step, which is configure security group. So when we set up the database in RDS, we created a new security group already. So what we will do is click select an existing security group, and I will select the one we just created. As you might remember, I named it security tutorial. And as you can see down here, it shows us the inbound rules for the security group that are currently set, and it will come with one rule as default. Right now, we don't need to worry about that, so we'll just go to review and launch. And here it says, warning, you'll not be able to connect to this instance as AMI requires ports 22 to be open. That's fine. Your security group doesn't have ports 22 open. That's totally fine. Click continue. So here's just a review of everything that we have set up for the instance, and we can just click launch. Once you click launch, there'll be one last thing that you need to do, and this one is critical. You will need to download a private key, and this key gives you access to the instance if you need to connect to it remotely, which is what we will be doing to set up the instance later. Essentially, there's a public key that AWS keeps, and there's a private key that you download onto your computer. It's a file. And when you go to access your EC2 instance, AWS will see if these keys match, and if they do, you are allowed access into the instance. It is critical that when you download this key, you store it in a secure location on your computer that you know no one else has access to, or only the people who need to have access to it have access to it, and that you do not lose or delete this key, because it is your way of getting into the instance. The way you download the key, first you will choose, if you have the option, create a new key pair, which is what I'm doing for this tutorial, but if you've set something up on AWS before, you might have an existing key you want to use. But for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to create a new key pair. I'm going to choose key pair type RSA, which I don't believe matters, which you choose. And I'm just going to call this mock social. And you are now going to download the key pair. And I'm going to save this key pair into a secure location. In my case, for this demonstration, I'm going to make a folder. And I'm going to call this keys. I'm making a folder on my desktop called keys. And within here, I'm going to save the mocksocial.pem file. Do not change the name of the file. So it's mocksocial.pem. Save it. You'll see that this is saved for me. I can close that. Now Amazon on their end have created the public key that they store, and this is no longer grayed out, and we can launch the instance. Again, it emphasizes you're stored in a secure and accessible location. You will not be able to download this file again. All right, so click Launch Instances, and it is now launching. So I will be exceeding the free usage tier because I've got multiple set up, but for you, there will be no charges because your instance will be operating within the limits of the services that Amazon offers, specifically EC2. And now that we have launched the instance, we can click here to view instances. And here now I have a list of the instances. The one at the top is a previous instance that I have created, which is running studysocial.media. And this bottom one is the one that I'm just setting up, which is still initializing. Now, I'm doing this a little bit out of order, but there are a few things that we need to do to make sure that the RDS instance and the EC2 instance, that is the database and where the data is stored, can talk to each other. Now, even if you successfully deploy the website, your RDS instance, that is your database, and EC2 instance, which is your storage, might not be able to talk to one another properly unless they have the proper networking settings. And a lot of this comes down to inbound and outbound rules. What connections can actually access one of those instances, and what kind of signals can be sent out of the instance. So we're going to go through them one by one to make sure that they're set up properly. First, we'll start with Amazon RDS, which again, you can go to through services up here, and then under database, go to RDS. When you're within the RDS management console, you can go to databases, select your database. And on this page, you're going to need to scroll down to security group rules and then select your security group, which will open in a new tab. Close this other tab and click this tab. And here you only need one inbound rule. I have a few too many here, but the only one that you need is this one right here, which is an IPv4 version rule with a type of MySQL, a protocol of TCP, a port range of 3306, and a source. Now, what this source is the IPv4 address for the EC2 instance. So right now, we're in the RDS settings. So we want to set a rule that allows the EC2 instance to send messages into the RDS instance. So that people who are interacting with the website, which is hosted on the EC2 instance, can input data, and that data can go into the RDS instant. So the source you see here, 172.30.1.30, is actually the public IPv4 address for the EC2 instance. And we can verify this by going to instances. I'm just going to open it in a new tab, clicking our instance, and looking, actually I meant private, sorry, it's the private IPv4 address here. So 172.30.1.30. If you see here, it's the same with a /32 at the end, which is necessary. So you want to make sure that you only have one inbound rule on the RDS instance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to edit inbound rules right here. And I'm going to delete everything that is not this one at the end here. I'll go delete, 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 delete. Just in case this isn't straightforward enough, how you'd create a new rule in case you have none here is to click add rule. Click the type and make sure that that is MySQL. Port range and TCP will be automatic. The source will be custom. and then you will manually type in or copy from the other page the private IPv4 address of the EC2 instance, and it will automatically come down as a block here, and you would select that. And so that's how you would make this single security rule that you need here. But for now, I'm just going to delete this and save rules. Now, as you can see here, the inbound rules for this security group have changed. The other thing that we want to ensure while we're here is that there are no outbound rules for the database. So if we go to outbound rules here, there are no security group rules found. What we'll be doing next is we'll be verifying that we have the correct security group settings, that is the inbound and outbound rules, on the EC2 instance. And from here, we'll just close this other tabs. We'll go to instances under instances because we're already in the EC2 settings. We will select our EC2 instance. And now that we're here, we can click on security, scroll down. You can see that we have the same security group here as we had in the RDS instance. But actually, we need a different security group because this one has different rules, and the rules for our EC2 instance need to be different because it's being publicly accessed by people all across the internet, which means that it's getting inbound connections from people all over the web, whereas the RDS instance only takes inbound connections from the EC2 instance. A little complicated, but what this means is we're going to need to make a different security group. So under network and security, we're going to go to security groups, and we're going to create a new security group. Create security group. I'm going to call the security group security tutorial 2. And then I'm going to select our shared VPC between the EC2 instance and the RDS. For me, that's VPC 725. And here we can edit our inbound and outbound rules. The default outbound rule is fine here. It says all traffic, all custom, and this 0.0.0.0/0, which means basically anyone can access the website if they want to access the website. So this default is fine. However, we do need to edit the inbound rules. And what we're going to do here is add 5 inbound rules. So I'm just going to click this 5 times, or 5. All of these will be custom TCP protocols. The port ranges, there will be 2 that are 80. There will be 1 that's 22, and 2 that are 443. So 443, 443. The source of these will be custom. So for each of these 80s and the 443s, you will want to be one of these, which is the 4 zeros and the 0. This one again, the 4 zeros and the 0. And then the other one, you want to be this kind of colon and the 0. And this one, you want to be the colon and the 0. And for this one, which is the port range of 22, you want this to be the one with 4 zeros as well. Now, that's all you need to do. You can click Create Security Group. Oh, I forgot. You have to add a description. So we'll just say that this is for the EC2 instance, just to remind ourselves. And then we'll click Create Security Group. It's now created the security group, but we need to change the EC2 instance from its previous security group to this one. So we'll click Instances. We'll go to our EC2 instance. We'll go to Security. And then here's this our old security group here. So this is the one that's shared with the RDS instance, but we want to change it to the one that we just made. So at the top, we'll go to Actions in the upper right-hand corner. You might not be able to see this because of where my face is, but there's the Actions button. Then there's a Security tab. Click Security, and then Change Security Groups. And then from here, you will need to search for the security group. So this one is Security Tutorial 2, and then click Add Security Group, and then remove the other one. So it's only the security group that we just created for the EC2 instance. Now click Remove. Then we will click Save. And now the security groups have been changed successfully. Okay, now that we've set up our inbound and outbound rules for our EC2 instance and our RDS database, we're just going to have to make sure that 2 things are true for both the EC2 instance and the RDS database. And those are making sure that the instances are both running and that they are connected to the same VPC group. While we're here, we can just check the EC2 instance first. As you can see here on the instance summary page, the instance state says that it is running. And as you can see, the VPC ID here is the 0725 VPC. And now we're just going to cross-reference this with the RDS instance. So I'm just going to go into services up here. This might look a little different because I was recording this over the course of several months. I'm going to go to RDS here under my recently visited. And now here at the RDS dashboard, I'm going to go to databases on the left. I'm going to go to our database, which is MockSocialDB. And on this page, you can see that the status is available for the RDS database, which means that it is in effect running, and that the VPC group is the same as the EC2 instance. It is the 07251 one. This essentially means that the EC2 instance and the RDS database are on the same network and can communicate with one another, which is going to be important for the Mock Social Media website tool to run using both of them to store the files on the EC2 instance and store the data on the RDS database. Now that we've done this, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to make sure that our EC2 instance has an elastic IP address associated with it. What this essentially means is that the EC2 instance will have an IP address that is associated with it so that people can be directed to it through the internet. This is a bit of a technical step, but it's one that we must make sure is done. So we'll start by going back to the EC2 instance. So I'm going to go back up to services and again to EC2 under my recently visited. And then on the left-hand panel, I'm going to go to Elastic IPs underneath the Network and Security tab. Now that we're on this page, you will likely see nothing over here. Again, I have already set up one other instance, so this is not the same instance that I just created for the purposes of this tutorial, so I do have something here, but you likely will not. So what you will need to do is click Allocate Elastic IP Address over here in the upper right. You will select a public IPv4 address pool from Amazon's pool of IPv4 addresses and click Allocate. Now you will have allocated an IP address from Amazon, but you'll still need to associate that with your EC2 instance. So right now, as you can see, under Associated Instance ID, there's nothing. And as we've seen this up here, it says that you've allocated the IP address successfully, but you still need to associate this elastic IP address, which you can also do through this menu here in case you accidentally close this little notification. So we'll go with it selected, we will go to Associate Elastic IP Address. We will associate it with an instance. We will choose the instance here. For me, that is this one. And then we will click Associate. And now that I've associated it, you can see that the associated instance ID, so this is the instance that I set up during this tutorial, is up here, as well as a private IP address and an allocated IPv4 address. Okay, so just as a heads up, in case you do have multiple instances running like I do, you might need to exit the Elastic IPs page and say go back to the dashboard and then click back into Elastic IPs to see it fully update. But now that we are here, you can see that I have two different allocated IPv4 addresses for my previous instance, which is the one running studysocial.media, and my newly created instance for this tutorial, which you can see right here. And it has its own IPv4 address. So now it has a home on the web. This means that it effectively has a address on the internet. That address is not associated with a domain name yet, but there is a place to go where it is. So if we just copy the IPv4 address and we click here, click paste, and we try to access it, nothing will happen because right now there is nothing in that EC2 instance. So there's nothing to connect to. But I'll close this. So right now, to recap, we have bought a domain name. We have an IP address that is not associated with the domain name. We have storage, the EC2 instance, which is associated with the IP address. And we also have the database, which is created and ready to accept configurations and data from the Mock Social Media website tool. But right now, there's nothing in the instance to give it instructions. So it's just sitting there waiting. What we'll do next is we'll connect our EC2 instance and the IP address that is associated with it with our domain name. To do this, you'll need to be logged into both your AWS console, which we are here, as well as your domain registrar's website where you can manage the domain name that you just bought. So I'm going to do that now. So here I am logged into Namecheap with my personal account that owns the domain name quadtalk.app. Long story, you don't have time to get into it. What we'll need to do here is add DNS records to our domain name. Depending on your registrar, you will do this in different ways. So I would really consult the registrar's support pages. So if you're using HostGator, if you're using Google Domains, they all have a different kind of menu and system. But Usually this is some sort of advanced kind of setting that you'll have to configure. So for that, I'll go into my advanced DNS. So right now we have no records available here. We only need to add one record here, and then we're going to let Amazon handle the rest through a service that they provide called Amazon Route 53, which is free as well. So we'll click here to add a new record, and this will be an A record. The host of this, we will just put an @ sign. The value we will have to put as the public IPv4 address of the EC2 instance that we just created. Now, how do we find out that public IPv4 address for our EC2 instance? Well, we'll head back into Amazon AWS, and here we will go to the instances page under instances. We will select our instance. For me, that's this one. And right here in the second column in the instance summary, you can find the public IPv4 address. We can just copy this using this copy button next to the IP address, go back to our registrar, and paste it here. Then we can just, in my case, I have to check here to save it. But again, the user interface will differ depending on the registrar that you use. I will click save. And there you go. It is saved. Actually, I lied. You need to add one more record, which is very, very similar. This will also be an A record, but instead of the host being the @ the host will be www. And then we'll have the same value here as we did above, which is the public IPv4 address for the EC2 instance. We will click Save Changes here, or whatever that save change looks like in your registrar. And then the next thing that we need to do is to configure the rest of this in Amazon's Route 53, which is a free service offered by Amazon Web Services as well, but it will handle more of the DNS side of things. So for this, we will go back to our instance summary. We can go to here on AWS, again, under instances in the EC2 dashboard, and we'll find in the third column this public IPv4 DNS. And we'll just need to copy this for now, okay? And then from here, we want to move to Amazon Route 53, which we can do by going to Services, scrolling down, and then under Networking and Content Delivery, clicking Route 53. Once on the Route 53 dashboard, we want to go to Hosted Zones up here. And we'll need to create a new hosted zone using this orange button over here. So here we will put the domain name that you want to route traffic to. This, for me, is quadtalk.app. And if we click info here, it confirms that you do not need to add www. in front of your domain name, just the domain name itself. The description, you can add if you want, you don't really need to. And select public hosted zone, and you can click create hosted zone. Now, these two records have been created by Amazon. What we need to do is modify this record right here. So you can do that by clicking on this checkbox next to it. You can see that there's also existing values in this record. We want to add one more. So you can go click edit record. And here where it says value, we can press enter to a new line and then paste our public IPv4 DNS. And once we're done, we can click save down here. And we are done. And you can see that this public IPv4 DNS has been added here. Now that we've allowed Amazon to manage our domain name, there's one more thing we need to do before we're able to download the code, modify it, and upload it to deploy the tool. And that is to set up the rules by which Amazon's EC2 instance can talk to some of the other Amazon Web Services, including and most notably Amazon's RDS, the database. For this, Amazon has a tool called Identity Access and Management. And you can find this by going to Services, scrolling down to Security, Identity, and Compliance, and selecting IAM here, or IAM. From here, we want to go to Roles on the left-hand side. So we'll click here and go Roles. On this page, we want to create a new role. We can do this by clicking the Create Role button, which is in the upper right, but is sort of blocked by my video. Essentially, what we will be doing here is giving Amazon the rules by which the different Amazon Web Services can talk to each other. And what this allows it to do is that when a user is logging into the Mock Social Media website and is accessing something through the EC2 instance, and that EC2 instance wants to call the database to either present a study or save some data into it, it will have the rules by which it allows each user to save data or retrieve data. And essentially you're setting the guardrails for what each service can and can't do in coordination with another service. And we're using several services here. Okay, so what we will do is we will choose AWS service here, and under use case, we'll select EC2. And if we have this blue background on it, it is selected, so we can go to next permissions. And from here, we'll have the ability to choose the various different policies to add to our permissions. And we will search here for two different policies. The first will be CloudWatch Agent Server policy. And if we use this little caret or drop down right here, we can see that it's actually changing 4 different other resources automatically. And these are sort of grouped within one policy group. So you can think of the policy groups as like a set of predetermined ways that things can interact. And this can make things much easier than, individually adding each different parameter. So I'm just going to scroll back up. I'm going to minimize this. And what I want to do is I want to add this policy. So I'll check this on the left. And I'm going to search for one more policy, which is going to be Amazon SSM full access. And I'm going to check that off as well. Now, even though we had to search again for this one, it may look like the CloudWatch Agent Server policy, the first one that we checked off, is not checked off as well. But that is not the case, because if we just, close the search bar and see a list of all the policies again, if we continue scrolling, you will see that the Amazon SSM full access is still checked off, even though that we're not searching for anything anymore. So they're checked off. Trust me, it's just we're filtering through what we're allowed to see because there's hundreds of different policies to choose from. Now that we've selected these 2 policies, we can click next and go to tags. We don't need to add any tags because this is the only role that we will be dealing with. We'll go to next, review, and we'll give the role a name. I'm just going to call this tutorial role. And here's a role description. We're just going to leave that as is. For my own sake, I'm just going to put a -tutorial at the end so I can tell between the other roles I have set up. Here it says trusted entities, AWS service, ec2.amazonaws.com. That's what we want. Permission boundaries are not set. That's fine. And we can click create role. And now back at the roles page, it now says the role has been created. So if we actually scroll down here, I have a lot of them, but here, tutorial role, you'll see it shows up. And now what we need to do is associate this role with our EC2 instance. So what I'll do is I will go back to my services, go to EC2. On the EC2 instances page, I'll select our instance. And on the instance summary page, you want to look in the upper right-hand corner, which is probably blocked by my video, but there's an actions dropdown. Click the actions dropdown, and under security, you can go to modify IAM role. You want to click that. Now we're going to associate that IAM role that we just created with the EC2 instance. So we'll click choose IAM role. I will select the tutorial role that we just created. And I'm going to go save. And now back at the EC2 dashboard, you can see here that says successfully attached tutorial role to instance. With that done, we can now move on to downloading the code, modifying it for your specific purposes, and then uploading it to the EC2 instance to be deployed online. Now the next step is that we download the code and make the necessary tweaks for it to play nice with our database, the domain name, and Amazon. So what we will do is we'll create a new folder wherever you want, and this folder will contain the files for our mock social media website tool. This is my desktop, and as you'll see here, I also have a folder open which contains the .pem file. This is the secure file that we downloaded when we created the EC2 instance and is needed later when we were going to upload the code to the EC2 instance and deploy the website online. But for now, I'm just going to create a different folder here, and I'm just going to call it code. It doesn't really matter. And what I want to do is open this folder in Visual Studio Code. So what I will do is I'll open Visual Studio Code. I'm just going to close this. There's an update available. And I'm also going to close this welcome tab. And I'll give an overview of what it looks like in a second. But right now we're just going to open that folder. We'll go File, Open Folder, click on the folder. In this case, I called it Code, select it. And now Visual Studio Code will refresh with the folder. So right now we just have this welcome tab open. And normally Up here, you will have tabs associated with each of the files that you have open. So you can be editing multiple files at once. Whereas on the left side of the screen, you'll see all the files inside of the folder that you're in. So we're in the code folder, but it's obviously empty. We just created it. We want to fill this with the files from the Mock Social Media website tool so that we have everything and we can go tweak the things that we need to tweak within it. So what I'll do is just close this welcome tab and we are going to open a terminal. So we'll go to terminal at the top here and new terminal. And now you see this whole panel at the bottom is opened up. And the terminal is essentially a way of inputting commands and executing functions, either on the command line or in certain different programming languages. I'm oversimplifying, but that's what it does. So the language that you have to use kind of depends on the kind of terminal that you have open. So mine defaulted to PowerShell. If you look in the upper right here, you'll see the type of terminal that you have open, and I only have one open right now, which is my default PowerShell. So you can see that shows up over here. That's not the one I want right now. I want a Git terminal open, specifically a bash terminal, because a bash terminal is used to execute Git commands. So to verify that you have Git and bash installed, you can click the plus button next to this arrow and see all the different kinds of terminals that you can open. I see git bash here, which means that I have it installed. Otherwise, it would not be there. So I'll just click git bash and I'll open the git bash terminal. Now you'll see like a menu of all the different terminals I have open, but we only need this bash terminal right now. So I'm going to click the trash button next to the PowerShell one that I had default. So now I only have this one bash terminal open. And you'll see that the terminal always is situated within some sort of folder. No matter which programming language or command line language that you're using, you'll always be executing commands within a specific folder. Here we can see the folder is desktop and code. What we're going to do is we're going to use a git command to get all of the different files from GitHub to our local computer for us to then modify. To do this, we're going to need to go to the GitHub repository where the Mock Social Media website is publicly available at. You can access the GitHub repository through the documentation website. So if I bring this over here, this is the landing page for the documentation website for the Mock Social Media website tool. If you look at the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a link to the GitHub page. You click that, and here you are at the public GitHub repository for the Mock Social Media website tool. What we want to do now is click this code button here. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be cloning this repository. That means we're going to be making an exact copy of the repository on our computer. We're cloning it. And we're going to need like the public link to the repository for Git to use. So we're going to make sure we're under the HTTPS tab here and click this copy button. So once we copy it, tells us that it's copied, we can minimize this. We can go back to Visual Studio Code and input the following command. Let me just move my cursor. Git, G-I-T, space clone, space, and then paste what we copied from the GitHub repository. And now all we need to do is hit enter. And voila, it has downloaded all the files we need for the Mock Social Media website tool. However, they're not within this folder. They're within a folder within this folder. And as I said, all the commands are executed within a specific folder. And right now, this is not the folder we need to be in. But as you can see, if I open this, we can see all the different files and all the different subfolders for the Mock Social Media website tool are now on our device and ready for us to edit. For simplicity purposes, I'm just going to open the folder within the folder. In this case, that's not the one named code, that's the one named Mock Social Media website. So we can go File, Open Folder, go within the code folder, and select the Mock Social Media website folder, click Select Folder, and here we are. We're in the root directory of all the different files. The first file that we'll need to tweak is within the backend folder. So this is actually a folder. If there's an arrow next to it, that means that it's a folder. We'll click the little arrow to expand the folder, and then we'll find config-production.json. We'll click that, and it'll open it as a tab here at the top. What we'll need to do on this page is input several different kinds of information. Some of it is that which we created when we created the database, such as its name, as well as the master username and password. Some of it is assigned to the database by Amazon after we created it. And some of it is stuff that we can specify, which can essentially be whatever we want it to be. And I'll go through it step by step. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the Visual Studio Code on the right of my screen, and I'm going to put AWS on the left-hand side of my screen so that we can cross-reference. On the right, you can see it's requesting a database name. So what we can do is we can go into our Amazon RDS and go into databases. And this is essentially what the DB identifier is for the database. So when we created the database, we called it mocksocialdb. So under name here within the quotes, I'm going to go mocksocialdb. The username and password, which I hope you wrote down earlier when you created it. If not, you can just like delete that database and create a new one, was admin. And the password I had used at the time was this one, which you couldn't see before, but that's what the password was. I'm going to put the exact password in here. So my Mock Social Media website tool has the proper authentication to access a database whenever it wants to send or receive data from it. For the host, we're going to need to look for the endpoint of the database. And we do that by going back into AWS and clicking on the database. And when we're under the connectivity and security tab over here, if we scroll down, we can find the endpoint and the port. The port is 3306 and that's standard. So unless you want to go to great lengths to change this for no apparent reason, just leave it as is. The endpoint, however, will be specific to your particular database. And I'm just going to go here, copy it, and I'm going to paste it here as the host. And to save documents in Visual Studio Code, you can just go Control S, or you'll probably go File Save as well. But whatever the shortcut is on your operating system, in Windows, it's Control S. You might not be able to see this because of where my webcam is located, but there you go. The full endpoint address has been pasted into the host category here. I'll go back and I'll put this to the side. I should note that your Visual Studio Code might not look completely the same, but don't get freaked out. What the words are on the page are what matter most. I have this fancy coloring and stuff like that here. That's just to help me visually see what level of code I'm in. It's not necessary. All that matters is what is written on the page in words, because you don't really need Visual Studio Code to make these changes. You can open all these files in your basic text editor like Notepad, but Visual Studio Code just has various different extensions which can help make things easier, and I have some of them installed. And we'll just need to verify again the port is the same as what is shown up over here, and the dialect is MySQL, which should be the default. Now, the next thing is we're going to give admin credentials. Admin credentials are the usernames and the passwords of the researchers who can go in and make studies using the Mock Social Media website tool. This is not for participants. This is for each individual researcher that you want to be able to go in and independently make studies and have their data be independent from all other users, such that the other users cannot access the data from your studies. This is ideal for if you're working in a lab and there might be 2-3 researchers with different lines of research, and each of them need to have independent access to their data due to ethical reasons, or limit the amount of people that do have access to the data. For each of them, you can specify a different username and a different password. In our case, I'm just going to create 3 basic credentials, which are researcher 1, password 1, researcher 2, and I think it goes without saying that you should try to make these more secure than what I'm just throwing in here for demonstrative purposes. And password 3. Sorry, I accidentally didn't put it in the quotes there. There. I'm going to save as I go, so Control S. The last thing that you'll need to modify on this page is to add a secret and a secret user. My understanding of this is pretty limited, but this just needs to be a random string of characters that can be used for encryption purposes. So for this, what I do is I just generate hashes. So random strings of characters. If I just click here and say generate hashes and click it again, it will give me a random string of characters I can use to input here, which will help encrypt any data transfer between the database and I believe the EC2 instance. Really doesn't matter what you put here as far as I understand, but if you put a longer hash, it's better. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use some hashes I generated earlier and put into the written documentation. I'm going to paste them here, paste this one here as well. I'll just save it and I'll just maximize this so you can have a good look at it. These are just long, meaningless strings of characters for the purposes of encryption. And now I'm just going to save this one last time. This back over here. And we are done modifying the config-production.json file. What I'm going to do next is just maximize this because we'll focus here for now. And now, while we're still in the backend folder, we'll need to modify a second file, which is the server.js file. I click to open this here. You'll see it opens in its own tab. And you'll see that there's a lot of code here. Don't worry, most of it does not concern you. But we will need to scroll down to about line 134 here, 135, 136. And you'll see here that there are a whole bunch of URLs. So we will need to change these ones, the ones that say studysocial.media. There's two of them. One essentially has a www dot and the other one doesn't. In both cases, you'll need to change these to what your domain name is. For the purposes of example, it's quadtalk.app. And this one, again, preserving the www.quadtalk.app. Just Control S and save it. So you might be noticing that some letters and colors are showing up here next to files and folders containing files that have changed. So this little M here in the orange color just means that this has been modified from the original. So don't freak out. This helps GitHub understand what is modified, what needs to be downloaded, what can just be left alone. It's not really a big concern in this case, but just in case you're worried. Now we're done tweaking things in the backend folder. And you can even close these if you want. I like to do that just so my workspace is clean, and minimize the backend folder. And now click the front end folder. And in here, you're going to need to find a file called nginx, nginx.conf, like config. Click that and open it. Now, within this nginx.config file, you'll need to, again, replace any mentions of studysocial.media with your domain name. So I'm just going to go replace this with quadtalk.app. And to make this easier, I'm just going to copy that. But I'm going to preserve the www dot for the other one. I'm going to paste this here. Find every other mention of studysocial.media. So right here, there's another right here. And even within these URLs, there's studysocial.media. So let's change to quadtalk.app here as well. And I believe that is all that needs to be changed here. So I'll just Control S, which is save. Okay, now that we've saved our nginx.conf file, there's one last file we need to modify in the code. So if we look within the front end folder in the src subfolder, which I'll open using this arrow here, there's an http common.js file. And here you'll find the last instance of studysocial.media that we need to change to our domain name. So I'm just gonna select this right here and change this to quadtalk.app and hit Control S to save it. Now that we've saved the http common.js file, we're in the final stretch, and now we're ready to set up our EC2 instance to be able to accept and host our mock social media website tool. And so what we're going to do is we're going to head back to our EC2 dashboard in AWS. So I'm just in my management console, and I'm going to go under services and into my recently visited, just go to EC2. Now I'm going to make sure that I check my instance and then click connect at the top. This will send you to a page which has some instructions on how you will connect to this instance remotely, as in from your computer using a terminal in Visual Studio Code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my Visual Studio Code on one side and the instructions from Amazon on the other, and we're going to follow them through. Though we are in Visual Studio Code, we're going to need to open the folder that contains our .pem key file instead of the code for the mock social media website tool. Just minimize this here. We have two folders. We have one which contains the key that we downloaded once we created the EC2 instance, and we have another folder which contains the code. We're in the one that contains the code right now, so we're going to need to change that. Go File, Open Folder. I'm going to go back up to my desktop and click the keys folder that I created, which can be any folder on your computer. These are just what I'm using. And we'll see there's a mocksocial.pem file here. Within this folder, we're going to need to open a bash terminal. So we'll do that. We'll just close this and go to Terminal, New Terminal, and open a git bash terminal. We can close the PowerShell one. As you can see here on the right, it says the key used to launch this instance is mocksocial.pem, and we are in the folder with that key here. Now that we have the instructions on the right on AWS and our bash terminal open in Visual Studio Code, within the folder containing the mocksocial.pem, we are ready to try and access the EC2 instance. And actually, we really just need this example right here, which is all we'll really need to access the EC2 instance. And what we can do is we can copy this and paste it here. So what we're looking at here is basically it's an SSH command, which means that it's a way of interacting with a remote server locally from your device, we will use our mocksocial.pem to authenticate that we deserve to access this and we have permission to access this. And then there's the location of the server. So we're just gonna put this in here and hit enter. And after we hit enter, we get this little error message that is saying that they cannot be certain that the host that we're trying to connect to is authentic. We know it's authentic because it's literally what Amazon told us to access. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, yes, we want to continue connected to this device. And what we'll do is we'll press YES and then hit enter. And we're in. You know we're in because this little graphic made out of text shows up. It says EC2, Amazon Linux 2 AMI. This means that we are now inside of the EC2 instance, and any commands we run in this terminal will be run inside the instance. So we're basically accessing it remotely. I'm just going to make this a little bigger. Now that we're inside this instance, we're going to run a couple commands that are going to install various kinds of software inside the instance. So you can think of the instance as its own little computer. That's basically what it is. It's a little computer that's running a version of Linux made by Amazon, and it's a blank slate right now. We need to install some software on there that will be required for executing our mock social media website tool on the server. And because we're in a Linux instance, the commands that we will be using are those that are used on Linux devices. First one we'll be typing in is sudo, sudo, Amazon-Linux-extras install Docker. Press enter, and it is installing Docker now. And it says a summary, it installed one package. There's total download size, the totally installed size. Is this okay? We're just going to say Y for yes, and then hit enter again. Basically gave us a summary first of what it's going to download, and now it's actually installing it. It said completed. You actually scroll up here. It says installed right here. It says complete. And this is just kind of a summary of other stuff you don't need to worry about. Next command we're going to input, and this will all be in the documentation, so you can just copy and paste. Next command will be sudo service docker start. Okay, so now Docker has started running in the EC2 instance. Next, we're going to do sudo usermod -a -G docker EC2-user. Enter. Next, sudo chkconfig space docker space on. Okay, and then the next thing that we're going to do is sudo yum install -y. Sorry, let me move my cursor there. Sudo yum install -y git. This will install git. Complete. Great. Now we're just going to reboot the instance by going sudo reboot, reboot. So because we rebooted the server, it kicked us out. So we're just going to need to SSH or remotely connect to it again. So what we'll do is we'll copy this command once more, paste it into here, press enter. So if you try to do that immediately and the server has not rebooted yet, you'll get a connection timed out error, which is what I got here. See, it says connection timed out. So we'll just wait a little bit. Okay, a couple minutes have passed, and now I'm just going to try and go back into the instance. I'll hit enter. And there you go. It's successful. That took maybe like 3 minutes or so for it to reboot. And now we're back at the command line again, ready to input more commands. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to install Docker Compose on here. And this command is a bit long, so I'm just going to copy and paste it here. There's the command. Again, this will all be available in the documentation for you to copy and paste, but I wasn't going to write that one out. So let's click enter. And it looks like it has completed. You know, sometimes they have like great big completed messages. Other times it's like, we're done. What do you want? In this case, also, we're done. What do you want? Next, we will run this command. Then we will run this command. And this tells us that Docker Compose has been installed successfully because we just checked the version of Docker Compose. Next, we will enter the following command, which is cd/tmp, which should move us into the tmp folder. From here, we're going to run a few other commands to install a certbot. What the certbot will do is it will help us get that nice sweet HTTPS on our website no matter what, so that there's always an SSL certificate for this website. So I'm going to type this here, run this command, and then now when this arrow comes up, you add this URL in there and hit enter. And now that has been completed. Okay, at this point, my terminal looks a little different, and I want to explain to you why that is. As you can see here, it says client loop, send disconnect, connection reset by peer. And oftentimes you'll be kicked back to your default bash terminal if you go too long without interacting with the EC2 instance. And so because I had to record this across several days, I got kicked out of my terminal, and therefore this means that I have to reconnect to the instance. And the way to do that is exactly the same way we connected to it in the first place, is by copying the example command, pasting it in here, and pressing enter. And now you're back in the instance. Now, I'm going through this process for the first time and getting the troubleshooting out of the way. So just in case you see that stuff in my terminal doesn't look exactly sequential in terms of one step after the next, just pay attention to the step that I'm explaining, and that will be the correct step that you have to do next. If you're doing this next step right after you did the previous two steps, which I've highlighted here in the terminal history, you'll notice that something changed. So in the first command, we see that I typed in cd and then /tmp. CD stands for change directory. So what we did is we went into the TMP folder to conduct the second command here. And you can tell that because the little thing in brackets before we're allowed to enter our commands actually notifies us that, okay, you're doing this command in the TMP folder. So for the following command, you'll need to get out of the TMP folder. In my case, I've reconnected to the terminal, and thus I'm already in the main root directory. But say I did that same command here and cd tmp, cd /tmp /, you'll see that here I'm in the TMP folder again. To get back to the folder that you were in previously, you can do cd space and do a dash. If you hit enter, it goes to the folder that you're previously in, which in this case is home/EC2 test user, which is the folder that we want to be in to continue. Also, if you're too deep into a series of folders in the EC2 instance, you can simply use the command cd to return to your home. In this case, it didn't do anything because we're already in the home folder. So the next thing that we're going to do is install certbot onto our EC2 instance. Certbot is essentially software that enables SSL encryption on your website. That is, it allows you to have an HTTPS version of your website active. To install certbot, we're going to follow these instructions on Amazon's website. The link to these instructions will be provided on the associated written documentation, but I'm going to keep them side by side with the terminal open so we can follow through together. And we're just going to skip past some of this. Don't worry about the warning. We're going to fix that later. And the benefit of using this is that we can just use these copy buttons on the side to copy the code and then put it right into our EC2 instance in the terminal. So the first thing that we'll be doing before we install is installing this extra packages for Enterprise Linux. And we're just going to go one by one and put these commands in because it doesn't really matter to us what exactly it's doing. We just need these things installed as a prerequisite. So I'm going to copy this, go to my terminal, paste it, and then hit enter. As you can see here, we got a finish notification. We're going to move on to the next one, B over here. We're going to go paste. It's done updating. We're going to do C next, which will enable these extra packages for Linux. Now you know that is done because it has returned us back to the place where we can enter our own commands. And lastly, we're going to run this one command right here, also in C. To see what we have enabled. As you can see right here, just like as it shows on the Amazon Web Services page, we have EPEL, x86 64, debug info, source, and these three testing packages. All of them are showing as enabled. just as it shows on Amazon Web Services. Of course, we also have Docker installed on here, so it's not showing exactly this. There's more. So this ... just means that there are other things that could be installed before or after this, and it's just focusing on the EPEL. Okay, the next thing that we will do is we'll need to edit a file inside of our EC2 server. But before we can do that, we need to install one more thing, which is Apache Web Server. And to do that, we'll need to enter the following command, which is sudo yum install -y httpd. And then we can hit enter. And it's complete. Now, before we go any further, we're just going to update all of our existing packages, which we're going to do using a command sudo yum update -y. I'm going to hit enter. This is just to make sure that we don't run into any potential issues and everything's up to date, tip top, ready to go for when we install certbot next. But before we install certbot, we're going to do this step right here, which is editing the main Apache configuration file, which is located at this directory in our EC2 instance. And this is the file that we will be editing. So the first thing we'll need to do is we'll need to navigate to this directory. And we can do that by, again, using the cd command. So cd, start with a /, and then we can input the folder that we want to be into. So etc/httpd/conf, and hit enter. And now it says conf here, which means that we are in the conf folder. How we're going to go about editing this httpd.conf file is by typing in vim, V-I-M, followed by the name of the file, which is httpd.conf. And when you hit enter, you'll see that everything has changed quite a bit here. And instead of looking at the terminal code and output that was previously here, you're actually looking at the httpd.conf file. And you can navigate through here with your arrow keys. As you can see, the little white highlighted thing is showing the where we are selecting in this document. And you can scroll through it, going up and down here. And that's how you navigate the file. You can't immediately edit this file directly. So don't go and press random buttons because you might do something bad. What we'll need to do is find this listen 80 part of the file here. Underneath this, Amazon tells us we need to add this piece of text here. Before we add anything, we need to go into insert mode. And we will do that by hitting I. When we hit I, it says here we are now in insert mode. And it also gives us a warning. It says changing a read-only file. That's fine. We'll go over here and we'll copy what's over here. And when we return to this, we will paste. However, we need to change a couple things here, specifically this example.com. So I'm just going to go backspace here. So remember, whatever you select, if you backspace, it will backspace the character before it. So the quote, even though I'm selecting the quote here, it's backspacing what's before the quote. And here I will type in my domain name that I bought. So quadtalk.app. And same goes for down here, except for here, there's also the www. So we'll go quadtalk.app. Now that we're done editing, we don't want to touch this file anymore. We want to close it and save it. The first thing we need to do is exit insert mode. We do that by hitting the escape key on Windows. I will hit escape, and you'll see now that insert mode is gone. But now we want to quit and save. You do that by actually entering a command into this bottom bar here. So it's not exactly clear here, but there's actually one panel here which has the actual contents of the file. And then down here, there's actually kind of like a terminal that you can input commands into. So if you click here, you can actually enter commands that are not in the document, but in the terminal of this text editor. So here I will go :w sudo cee space %, space this sign, which is greater than, space /dev/null. And then you can hit enter. And now it gives you a little warning that says, warning, the file has changed and the buffer has changed and will as well, which is fine. So we will just go okay with a capital O. Now to exit this editor, we will just click here once again and enter the command :q ! Hit enter, and okay, now we're finally out of there and the file has been changed. To verify that the file has been successfully changed, we can just type in this same command once again. So vim httpd.conf, I can hit enter. It opens the editor once more, and it's actually, as you can see, the same document with our changes. See, I've added my domain name right there, quadtalk and quadtalk.app, successfully saved. So to quit, we can just go :q ! And hit enter, and we are back at our terminal. And next we will just run this command to restart Apache. So this command will just restart it. We'll hit enter, and it is done. Next we will move on to installing and running certbot itself. Now that we've already installed the dependencies, as in the software that it needs to run, and like before, we'll continue to copy the commands that it shows us here and paste them into our terminal and hit enter. Once it is done, you'll get a complete message here, and we can insert the next command, which is sudo certbot. So we'll copy this command, hit enter, and despite this error, we're going to press forward. So what this next prompt will have us doing is inserting our email address, and this is going to be used just in case your certificate lapses for some strange reason, or there's like an urgent security notice as a result of certbot. It'll have a place to notify you as opposed to whatever bad happening without you knowing. So I'm just going to enter my Ryerson email address here. I'm going to hit enter. And now it's going to ask us to agree to the terms of service. We're going to hit Y, capital Y, enter. Now it's saying that, would you be willing, once your first certificate is successfully issued, to share your email address with the Electronic Frontier Foundation? You don't have to, but the Electronic Frontier Foundation is a wonderful organization that creates all kinds of tools to make the web safer. However, I'm just going to say no. N, capital N, enter. And it says here, which names would you like to activate HTTPS for? You can choose either one of the two addresses that we entered into the HTTPD file. In this case, it says leave input blank to select all options shown. So we're not going to press anything besides enter. And there you go. It is done. We have successfully set up HTTPS on our domain name. However, what you might notice is that here under the important notes, it says that your certificate will expire what is 3 months after you have completed this step. What we want to do is set up certbot so that it will auto renew by itself without us having to go through it, because these certificates are only valid for a certain period of time. For that, we will just scroll down here. We'll need to follow the instructions in this configure automated certificate renewal section here on Amazon's website. So first, we'll need to get to the correct directory. Right now, we're in the conf directory, so that's kind of deep in there. So we will want to return to the home directory first, which we can do by just typing cd and then hitting enter. Now we are in the home directory. As it says here, we'll need to navigate to a certain file, but we can do that quickly by just entering this command, which is sudo crontab-e, and this will open another editor for us to modify a file. So you'll see we're in another document that we can edit. We can, again, use the arrow key up and down to navigate, but actually there's nothing in this document as of yet. We need to add something to this document. So we'll need to add a line similar to what is here in the example. And here Amazon gives a couple more details on how you can customize this command to be more specific for how you would like the certificate to be renewed, but we only really care about the certificates being renewed. So I'm going to copy this command. Unfortunately, this one doesn't have an easy copy button. I'm going to go Control-C here. Then I'm going to go into this document. And I'm going to hit the I button again to go into insert mode. And here I can then paste what I've copied. Now that we're done with inserting, we can hit the escape button. That will exit insert mode. Then we can click down here to that kind of invisible bar and go : WQ exclamation mark. And what this really does is the W saves it, and then the Q exits the command. And if you put the exclamation at the end, kind of forces to exit without asking you a whole bunch of questions afterwards. So we're going to do that. So colon, WQ, exclamation mark, enter. And now we're done. If we want to verify that our changes are still there, we could just do the command again. We can go sudo cron tab -e, and you can see what we added is still there. But since this is as I need and I don't need to make any changes to it, I can just click down here and go colon, Q, exclamation mark. Again, Q just means quick, exclamation mark means do it. I don't want any questions asked. And we are done that. The last thing that we need to do is we need to restart this service, which does the renewal because we just modified some of its settings. We can do that by clicking this copy button, clicking here, pasting, and hitting enter. And we're done. Your domain name is now set up to auto-renew its SSL encryption. This will ensure that whether they visit the www version of your website or just the domain name itself, they will see an HTTPS version of the website that has SSL encryption enabled on it. And you can actually test this by going to your domain name. You can open a new tab, type it in, quadtalk.app, hit enter, and you will see there's a little lock icon next to your address, which means that its certificate is valid and the connection is secure. If you also go to the www version of the website, you will see that that is also secure. Okay, there are actually a few more things we have to do before we upload the code. The first is that we have to run a few more commands after our SSL has been successfully set up. Because it's a new day and I've been kicked out of the EC2 instance as my connection timed out, I'm just going to log back in again using the example command on Amazon's connect to instance page. Okay, we're back in. One thing we're going to do now is we're going to effectively connect our MySQL database that we created using Amazon RDS to our EC2 instance. Okay, so I accidentally had my recording off for this next bit, but it's very, very simple. The first thing that we need to do to connect our EC2 instance to our MySQL database on Amazon RDS is to install MySQL onto the Amazon EC2 instance. So here I am once again logged into the EC2 instance using my .pem file, and I input this command, sudo yum install MySQL. And this basically went ahead and installed MariaDB, which is like Amazon's brand of MySQL. And then it briefly asked me after downloading the files, is this okay? To which I hit Y and enter. And then it installed it, it verified the install, and then it completed. And now that MySQL has been installed, we can input a command that uses information based upon specifics of our database as it's set up in Amazon RDS, as well as the information we created for the database when we configured it, such as the username and the password. So I'm just going to put the MockSocialDB database on one side while I have the EC2 instance that I'm connected to on the other. We will type MySQL, MySQL, space dash lowercase h, space, and then we'll copy the endpoint here from the database page on Amazon RDS. This is our database. Under the connectivity and security tab panel here, this is an endpoint, copy it, paste it here, then space dash capital P space, and here's where we input the port, but that's going to be 3306 for everyone, and then space dash u, lowercase u, space, and now we need to enter the master username that we set up when we set up the RDS database. Just in case you've forgotten it by now, you may remember that we actually input this into our config-production.json file. And here I have that open in a different Visual Studio Code window, which you can always open a new window using File, New Window, and navigate to a different folder. You can have as many of these open as you would like. So within the backend folder, there's this config-production.json file where we input information about our database when we set it up, our admin credentials, and our secrets. So we would just copy and paste the username here. Then we would go space and then dash lowercase p. Once we've done that and hit enter, it will ask us for the password. Now, when you type in your password here, whether you type it in or paste it, it will not show you typing the actual password. It's invisible. You know how sometimes when you enter a password somewhere, there's like placeholder dots or stars? That's not the case here. You won't be able to see it, but it is being typed in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight password here, copy that, paste the password here. So I pasted it, but you can't see it because it's invisible, and just hit enter. And now it says, welcome to the MariaDB monitor. Your MySQL connection ID is blah, blah, blah. We are in the MySQL server. Now that's all we need here. So we can just go /quit and hit enter, and we're out of there. Now, before we can upload our code to the EC2 instance, we actually need to upload it to GitHub first. Having code on GitHub is advantageous for updating it quickly and also makes some of the commands easier for uploading it to your EC2 instance. So that's what we're going to do. At this stage, you have to have a GitHub account. And when you open up GitHub, you're going to need to create a new repository, which up here on the upper left, if you just go to the home page while signed in, go repositories, new. I'm going to be the owner, make yourself the owner. And in this case, I'm going to make the repository mock social tutorial. You don't have to give it a description, but make this repository private. And this is important because your passwords and stuff are in these files, and you don't want others to be able to readily Google your passwords and then use those to access your website or access the researcher portal, access your EC2 instance, whatever it may be. You want this information to stay private. So there's some additional options here, like add a readme, add get ignored. Just leave these for now and just click create repository. Now this is an empty repository, which means that it has no code on it. And so by default, GitHub gives you a whole bunch of different instructions for how you can upload your code to GitHub. We're going to do this directly through Visual Studio Code. I'm just going to switch to our folder in Visual Studio Code, which is full of all the files for the tool. So as you can see here, we have the config production file, we have our backend folder, our frontend folder, and we are in the main folder. So that is the mock social media website folder. What we want to do is open up a git bash terminal here. So we'll go terminal, new terminal, just make this a little smaller. And my default is PowerShell, but what I want is a git bash terminal. So I opened a git bash terminal. I'm going to close the original PowerShell terminal. Now that we're here, we're going to do a series of steps that will prepare us to push our local files to GitHub and then actually push those files to GitHub. And some of these might be redundant and actually done because the code already has, some Git components in it, but we're going to do them anyway. So we're in this folder, and it's absolutely important that you are in this folder, the mock social media website folder. That is, the first level folders within it should be backend, frontend, GitHub, etc. What you're going to type in here while you're in this folder is git init and init and hit enter. And it says reinitializing existing Git repository because you actually downloaded this from GitHub. So it is already set up to know that it is a repository. Okay. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add all the different files within all the folders to our repository. And the way that you can do this is typing git add space and then hitting a period. The period says add everything. So you can just hit enter and it is done. It will not give you any sort of confirmation on that. It's just done. And what this does is it puts those files in a kind of staging area where each of the files is counted and it knows which files are going to be uploaded. But just to get a complete idea of what we are going to be uploading, you can type in git space status and hit enter. Here it says, here are the changes to be committed, because it knows that these are the files that we have modified since we originally downloaded the code. Not totally relevant right now, but I'm giving you a mini Git tutorial as we work our way through this. Now that we know what's changing and what we're going to upload, we're going to package these as a commit. So the commit basically specifies what is going to be uploaded when we actually upload it, and you can provide little messages alongside it to help you remember what the commit was. So multiple people, for example, could be committing to the same repository, and to keep track of what they have modified, they can add a comment saying that, okay, this commit was to fix a bug. This commit was to add a feature. So the way that we'll do this is we will go git commit, which has two M's, dash lowercase m, and in quotation marks, we'll put what the comment we want associated with the commit is. So for this, I'll just put initial commit. It doesn't really matter what you put in. And then I'm going to hit enter. And here's like a summary of what the commit will contain. 3 files changed. There'll be 31 insertions. Those are like literally the lines that are added, 31 deletions. Next, we're going to specify where we want to send this commit full of all these files. And to do this, we can actually go back to the new repository page that we created on GitHub, and we can find a command right here. Under push an existing repository from the command line, we can just copy this first command right here. And then we can navigate back to our terminal here in Bash, paste this command, hit enter. Because the software already comes from a GitHub repository, it already has a URL built into a repository that says where it should go back to, essentially. But we want to change that because you're not pushing this to the original Mock Social Media website tool on GitHub. You're pushing it to a private repository that is only on your account. So to do this, we need to first get a hold of the pathway. Make sure that HTTPS is selected here because it will change what shows up, and click copy and it will copy this little URL right here. We can then return to our terminal and type in the following command: git remote set -URL origin space, and then paste the repository URL. And then we can hit enter and it will have changed. Now we are ready to push our code to GitHub. And we can do this by inputting the command git push -u space origin, so that's where we're sending it to, space main. And then we can hit enter. And now it is done. So now if we return to our GitHub page and the repository and we refresh, we will see the code here. You effectively push this from your local computer to a place on the internet. Voila. Now that this code is on GitHub and accessible, we can then pull it from GitHub to our EC2 instance. So these are the basics of Git. You're pushing code from one place to another, and you're pulling it from one place to another. Usually pushing to a repository from a device, and then pulling from that repository to a different device, or to the same device, back and forth if you're making edits. So now that it's pushed to this repository, it exists there and it can be accessed. What we're going to need to do is go into our EC2 instance. To do this, the first thing that we're going to need to do is go into this code button over here, click on it, make sure you're on HTTPS, and copy this link. This is a link to your private repository containing all your code. Next, we're going to switch back to our EC2 instance, which is here. Okay, as you can see, I'm in the main folder of my EC2 instance, which you can tell by this little tilde and nothing after that. Now, similar to a pull request is a clone request. So a pull request is usually used when you're trying to update just whatever is new in the repository to your device. But a git clone command will make a duplicate of what's on the repository on your device. And you can clone the repository using a simple command, git space clone space, and then paste what we copied from the repository in our web browser. Hit enter, then it's going to ask us for our GitHub username. So here we will type in your username for your GitHub account, which for me is Arvin's Room. Hit enter. Now it's going to ask you for a password. And up until very recently, you could just type in your account password. But for additional security, you have to do something else instead this time. So we're going to switch back to our GitHub page. And we're going to go into the upper right here and then click settings. And while we're here, we're going to click on developer settings down here and then click personal access tokens. So every time that you want to access GitHub via a command line interface, you need to create a new personal access token. It's kind of like two-factor authentication. You can think about it like that. So anyways, I'm just going to generate a new token here. I'm going to enter my password in again. And then here you can configure a whole bunch of different aspects of what the token can be used for, what kind of permissions does it have. Here I'm just going to call this mock social tutorial. And the only thing that we really need right now is repo. So we can check repo, scroll to the bottom, click generate token. And now we have a personal access token right here. It's been created, so I'm going to copy it. It says here, make sure to copy it because you won't be able to see it again. Now from here, I'm going to head back to my terminal. And instead of putting in my account password, I'm going to paste in my personal access token and go Control V. And again, you won't be able to see the actual password show up here or no placeholder characters like dots or stars or anything like that. But assuredly, it is being input. And you can hit enter. And as you can see, now it is done. Just like that, it copied about 1,000 files into the EC2 instance, and now our files are actually in the EC2 instance. Now, there's one final command that we will need to execute, which helps pull the tool together and actually build it. So the way you can think about it is that the code for the Mock Social Media website tool is more like instructions on how to construct the final website that people see in the browser when they visit it. And this is beneficial for many different reasons, making it smaller, making it load faster, but it also helps hide some of the private information, such as your usernames and your passwords, so that that stuff is not pushed to people who are visiting the website and they can't, mess around in their browser and find that stuff just laying there. So the website that gets pushed is actually a packaged version that is just for viewing or using and not for modifying or having any sort of security vulnerabilities. Now, because it's another day and I was doing a whole bunch of troubleshooting to make sure that I would have solutions ready and avoid other problems that you might come across, I had to skip forward and run all the final commands to stitch the Mock Social Media website tool together and get it up and running and deployed on the website. However, I have my whole terminal history here, which I will guide you through to show you what I did and what the result was, and in one case, fix an error that can stop you from deploying the website successfully. To start, I logged into my EC2 instance, just as I always would. And the next thing that I did was that I navigated into the directory where the Mock Social Media website tool is located. Now, you'll see the first command that I input here is just ls. ls just gives you a list of all the files or folders. Folders are shown in blue here that are in the directory that you're in. So in the root directory, I put ls, and it shows there's this Fedora thing, and then there's this Mock Social tutorial thing. So what I did was I did cd, and then I did the name of my folder, which for me is Mock Social tutorial with a / at the end. And as you can see, my next line shows that I am in the Mock Social Media website tools directory. I did the ls command once again in this directory to make sure that I'm in the correct directory, and I am, because here's the backend folder, here's the front end folder with the license, the README, the Docker Compose, for development, and the Docker Compose for the actual production. And if I switch to my local copy of the Mock Social Media website tool, you can see here that the same stuff is in here. There's the backend folder, the front end folder, Docker Compose, the license, and the README. So there's some other troubleshooting here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip ahead and see that I input this command, and this is the command that gets the tool up and running and builds the website. Is docker-compose space up space -d space -- no -deps space -build for build. And I hit enter on this, and this is the final thing that would get your tool up and running. It went through a whole bunch of stuff here, but eventually it got this error right here, which says error response from daemon. Driver failed programming external connectivity on endpoint. Error started using user-defined proxy. And what this error is saying is that essentially this port 443 is already being used by something else. So you can think of ports as different like roadways in and out of a given location. In this case, your domain name and the EC2 instance there. And so what it's saying is this laneway is blocked by some other service that's using that right now. And there's two different ways that you can solve this. The first thing that you can do to avoid this error is to restart Docker. And the command to do that is sudo service docker restart. And then in the next line here, you see it says it's redirecting to restart Docker service, and it's done. It's restarted the Docker service. Now I'm just going to walk you through the rest of my troubleshooting here, just in case you have the same issue. And the following command we use to figure out which Docker containers are running right now. This command is docker ps. And essentially here we have a table that gets output, which shows us which containers are running right now and what's their status. So the way that the mock social media website tool is constructed is essentially there's a backend container, so that does all the stuff in the background, the processing of all the stuff that you see, and then there's a front end container. And that front end container is what displays the website and handles all the kind of user interface stuff. Here we see only the backend folder is running. There's no front end folder. And actually, if you look back at the error that we got, it started running the backend, and it successfully did run the backend. But when it got to running the front end, it said running 1 out of 2. It only ran the backend, and the front end got an error when it went to start. So the front end is failing to start here. And in this case, I just wanted to start from scratch. So I put in this command here, which is docker kill, and then the container ID, which is right here. Here's the container ID for the container I was running. Docker kill that container. And then if you do that, it will kill whatever container that you have. And so when I do docker ps again, you see that this table is empty. There's nothing in it. Nothing is running. This command over here shows, if you use Docker images, it shows you what images of containers were created. And so I've recorded this tutorial over the span of several weeks. So as you can see, the first time I did this was 2 weeks ago. And the images of these containers were first created at that time. This doesn't really matter, but just in case you were curious and I want to give a thorough run through of what you're looking at here. So this time I tried once again the same build command to stitch the website together, and I got the same error at the end. Same exact error, which means that trying to restart the Docker containers by forcibly killing the backend container and restarting this process did not solve this issue. So the next thing that was done was to look at if some of these ports, these laneways, are in use already. So the next thing you can do is that you can verify in the EC2 instance whether a port is in use by something active already. In the error, you see that port 443 is causing an issue here because that it says address already in use, but it's specifically referring to this port in the address. So to verify if a certain port is being used right now, you can run this command, which is sudo netstat -ntulp and then the vertical bar sign space grep space 443. And this will tell you what ports are in use right now. And right now we can see the 443 one is running. It's saying, listen, it's active right now. So that means the port that the mock social media website tool is trying to show its front end, its user interface to the internet, is actually being used by a different service on the EC2 instance. And so what is using up this port is actually a service we installed earlier to configure the SSL certificate, the HTTPS, called Apache. And it's running because it's running to recertify the SSL certificate after a certain period of time. Right now, it is interfering with the actual mock social media website tool getting online. So the command that you want to use to stop the service is this one right here, sudo /usr/sbin/apache ctl space stop. And what this is doing is it's navigating to the Apache service within your EC2 instances directories and telling it to stop. And now you'll see that the next time that we ran this command, so this sudo netstat command to see what ports are being used right now, remember we ran this above here, look at what was using port 443. We run it again here and nothing was output, which means that that port is free for use for our mock social media website tool. So right after this, knowing that the port is clear, ran the build command again. And so when you go to do this, I would follow these troubleshooting procedures. I would try to run the build command anyway, this docker compose command here, just to see in case it works. The next step would be to try and restart the Docker service, either by using the restart command or just killing the container ID and starting it up again, because that is more likely to solve various issues that you might have going on or come across, and sort of first step of defense. But in case that doesn't work, we're going to force stop the Apache service. That will be this, and then this to verify that the port is open, that the mock social media website tool would use, and then run the build command once more. And now when we scroll down here, you see that it says container backend running and container frontend started, but this time without an error at the end of it, which means that it's running on our domain. How do I know that it's running? Well, I can go and open a new browser window like I'm doing here. Go to my URL, quadtalk.app, hit enter, and the tool loads like magic. Now, the main URL, if you remember from the documentation, is just where the participants go to access a study in case they have an access code, but you haven't linked them directly to the URL with the access code in it. But we want to log in as researchers. So we'll go to quadtalk.app/admin, and this is the researcher login. So on this page, we can sign in using our researcher credentials that we hard-coded into the code before we uploaded it to GitHub. And so just for reference, you can go back to the code. So this is just like the local copy I have. And then I can go into the backend folder and go into config-production. And here we have the admin credentials for your own reference, but you should know them. So I'm going to log in as researcher1. Back at the admin portal of quadtalk.app, and I can input my username of researcher1 and my password of password1. And now I can click sign in. And if we're able to sign in, that means that this has been set up successfully and we can create and deploy studies at our will using the Mock Social Media website tool. And sign in. Boom. We get to inside the admin portal where we can create our conditions on this page, create different pages for those conditions on the subsequent areas, and collect and receive our data. Just as a demonstration to show that this is up and running, I'm going to create a condition name. I'm going to save this condition. This condition has an access code associated with it now. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to create an information page for this newly created test condition. I'm going to set it as active. I'm going to go to the left here to create an information page. I'm going to give this name test info. And here I'll just say testing that the Mock Social Media website tool can save and retrieve information from the RDS database. And I'll just add an I consent and I do not consent button at the end here. And I'll click save. So it says the information page has been successfully created. Now, I'm just going to go to condition settings. I'm going to copy the access code. Remember, this is kind of like the end of the URL that allows you to provide a unique link to a specific condition. And I'm just going to navigate there now. And I'll just go quadtalk.app and then I'll paste the access code and let's see if it shows up. Here we'll enter our participant ID. I'll just put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Any 6-digit code will work. I'll log in. And there you go. Testing that the Mock Social Media website tool can save and retrieve information from the RDS database. The fact that they were able to see this information page and this condition show up means that after creating a study, it was successfully saved to our RDS database. And then when a participant, such as me in this case, goes to view a study and engage with it, the Mock Social Media website tool will retrieve the study that is saved in the RDS database. And now when I click I consent, I'll click next. Thank you, your response has been recorded. You can safely close this page. I will now go back to the admin portal. Changes might not be saved. Okay, leave. And I'm still logged in here, but now I can go and I can set this condition as active and go check the data. I can see that there's one response from this data set. And now, as the researcher, now that someone's done the study, I want to download this data. So I'm just going to download the CSV for now. And I'm going to save it on my desktop. Now let's open the CSV and see our data, which should just be the I consent to participate. Now, if I move this over here, you'll see my data. Let me just make some of these columns bigger. And you'll see here that here's the unique response ID that's unique for each participant. The condition ID, which is just essentially like a background version of what the access code is, unless you're using a study that uses the same access code to randomize people into multiple conditions. This is just the unique ID of the condition. The access code, so this is the same as you can see here for 205.571. That's exactly what the access code is here. The participant ID that I input, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the only piece of data that I collect in this study, which is whether people consented or did not consent. In this case, I did consent, and thus I got a true response. And when I started doing the study, when I finished doing the study in UTC, I believe, which is a standard for recording dates internationally, and the condition name, which I called test. So there you have it. This has been perhaps a very long and difficult process that potentially required you to troubleshoot in addition to the information that I provided you. But if you made it this far, you should be really proud of yourself, because this is a brand new tool, and it's my biased belief that it's an incredibly powerful tool. And now that you have the website up and running at the domain name you chose, you can create as many studies as you want, and you can deploy as many studies as you want, essentially for free for the next 12 months while you have your Amazon Web Services trial. In my limited experience thus far, after that trial is up, it's about $33, $34, $35 per month to run, which of course you can just disable an instance and disable your database so it's not running anything or using anything. And in those cases, if you're not collecting data during certain months, you don't have to pay for any Amazon's Web Services, as you can just disable your EC2 instance or disable your RDS instance. Thanks for sticking through this. I hope this process went a bit smoother for you than it did for me as trying to troubleshoot along the way, but I've tried to condense all the instructions to just the core things you need to make sure that you do. But if you didn't skip any steps, hopefully you deployed this successfully, and I look forward to seeing the studies that you build using the tool. Thanks so much, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any technical issues or if there's some way I can help support the research that you're doing using the tool.